Welcome to Lawyers Without Billboards, where we break down family law and other areas of the law. No gimmicks, no legal jargon, just real, unfiltered talk from real lawyers. Join your hosts, Steve, Patty, Jimmy, and Alexa, partners at Shewmaker Lewis, a law firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Every episode, they tackle the legal questions that matter most: divorce, custody, child support, alimony, and everything in between. They'll pull back the curtain to give you real insights on what happens inside the courtroom and beyond.
All right, Alexa, we're fixing to do a podcast.
Yeah,
okay?
I know.
All right, you can't say fuck. This is a podcast. It's not a Coen Brothers movie, okay? Got it? Don't say fuck.
Who says I can't say fuck?
Every time you want to say fuck, bite your tongue.
For fuck's sake, don't
Hey,
say
are we
that.
live? Oh, here we go.
Oh,
Hey.
whoops, sorry.
All right, on the Ides of March, this is podcast number 2, and this is going to be the one on
Child
the game
custody,
show,
game.
Child Custody. Let's go.
Welcome back to Lawyers Without Billboards.
From Shewmaker Lewis.
All right, so you guys like game shows, right?
Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite game show?
Jerry Springer.
That's not a
that's
game
just not a
show.
game
It's not a game show?
No,
Okay,
it's
it's not a game show. Jeopardy.
Jeopardy?
Okay, kind
No,
of.
you like
kind
that?
of.
Oh, Wheel of, Price is Right.
There you go.
There you
That's
go. You
a
like
good
Price is
one.
Right. The Price
Jimmy?
is wrong, bitch.
Okay.
I can't say fuck, but you can say bitch. Come on.
Hey, you can't. You could take the girl out of Jersey, but not the Jersey out of
All right,
Alexa.
Get it right. It's teamwork.
Hey. All right. Get it under control.
Okay.
All right, we did promise that you would tell the bacon tree.
Oh, as a dad joke.
Yeah, let's start there first.
All right. Jimmy and Tuscan are cowboys out on the range, and they're out there riding on the range in West Texas. Not a tree in sight. It's just hot. They're riding, and they get lost. They forgot their compass and their map. They get all discombobulated and confused, and they're out there, and the horses die. And now they're walking, and they're walking, and they're walking, and they're walking forever, and they're almost near death. And finally, on the horizon, they see a tree, like a beautiful, like bushy kind of tree, and they're walking towards it. And they're like, "Oh, thank God!" And they're getting closer to the tree, and the tree's starting to shimmer in heat. The tree's starting to look a little weird, and they get close, and they realize it's like a scaffold. You know what a scaffold is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's stuff hanging all off the scaffold. And Tuscan gets close to the tree, and he reaches up and goes, "Hey, Jimmy, look, it's a bacon tree." And he reaches up. Tuscan reaches up to grab the first piece there, and suddenly bullets just come out of nowhere, and they just riddle Tuscan's body and Jimmy's, and they're lying there on the ground. They're dying.
Kinda
They're bleeding
brutal.
out. I know, it's brutal. They're bleeding out. And then Jimmy looks at Tuscan and he goes, "It was not a bacon tree. It was a ham bush." Okay. All right. That's such a bad dad joke.
wow.
But when I told that dad joke, unlike all the other dad jokes I tell, which get my daughter to sigh or roll her eyes, my 15-year-old daughter Molly burst out laughing in front of her 15-year-old friends. That's a good dad joke.
There you go.
It was a little long.
You wanted to hear it. It was a build-up.
It was a build-up.
Jimmy's
It was a
still,
build-up.
Jimmy's still thinking
It
about
was
it.
dad joke foreplay. It was a build-up.
At least you weren't the one who got shot.
Jimmy's like, wait,
I died.
They both died.
We both died.
Oh, I missed that part.
Oh,
Sorry.
is that why you didn't like it?
Oh.
All
Because
right.
Because he wasn't smart enough
Hey.
to anticipate the ambush.
I'm here all week. All right.
All right, so game shows. So
First off, do you really think I'm out riding horses in cartel territory? No. No.
All right, so how are game shows and custody likened? So I know, Steve, you had a story a while back where you had a case in front of Judge Padgett out in Richmond County. You remember that?
Wayne Padgett in Augusta, Georgia, Richmond County. And it was a tough case, a custody case, because it was binary. It was a marriage that had fallen apart. And without going into great depth on the story, my client was and is in the Air Force, an officer in the Air Force. And my client's getting on a plane, and my client's spouse is like, "Okay, we'll meet you in Honolulu in 30 days. And there was like one child, a little bitty, I think it was a boy. And as soon as my client gets on the plane to Honolulu, which is far, spouse runs right to North Carolina to the bosom of family and hunkers down, and the divorce case begins. And
It obviously doesn't bring the child to Honolulu.
right.
Doesn't
and,
join.
And for reasons that we're not going to get into in this podcast, jurisdiction remains in Georgia where nobody, even the child, lives. But we'll talk about that another day.
Yep.
And Judge Wayne Padgett had the authority to send the case to North Carolina, but he says, "No, I'm going to keep it right here." And we go through an initial temporary hearing and a whole bunch of stuff, and we come in for the final trial. And I'm representing my client, a lady, and the guy's represented by two different attorneys, one and then another one. And we all are there in the courtroom, and I'll never forget as long as I live. Judge Padgett comes in, and we all stand up, and I've got my exhibits, and my stuff's ready to go. I'm all prepared. I'm game on. And Judge Padgett looks at us all, and he goes, y'all, I'm about to hear he looks at my client and says, ma'am, I'm about to hear some bad stuff about you. And sir, I'm about to hear some bad stuff about you, and I'm going to have to decide what I believe and how much weight I give to it. And then I'm going to have to make a decision. And because one of you lives in Hawaii and one of you lives in North Carolina, and I can't split a child, I'm going to have to make a hard decision. And then he said something that just blew me away. He goes, in a way, this is like the sickest game show. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I was all ready to go to trial, and I just stood there, and I was like, damn, he nailed it. He's exactly right. That's what child custody is like. Now, I will give a nod to a friend and competitor down in Warner Robins, John Camp, who you all know. Mm-hmm. John, one time, he's older than all of us, and I think he's older than all of us combined, but he's older than me for sure. And one day he was talking to me because John's so old that he can't help mentoring anybody he talks to. And so what was happening was a mentorship session, and he says, Steve, child custody cases are not a mudslinging contest. Everybody thinks it's a mudslinging contest. The woman says, let me tell you how bad he is, and then the man's like, let me tell you how bad she is. He's like, no, an effective child custody case is a beauty contest. It's how good can you make yourself look, not how bad can you make the other person look. And that also was it just blew me away. And I use that analogy all the time. I use them both. Mm-hmm. But anyway, go ahead.
Wait,
you asked me.
What's up with the hat?
The purple hat?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do we have to do that?
All right.
That hat's been around for far too long.
The hat's been around longer than I've known both of you.
Very long
This hat. Okay. I'm going to lay this out here.
Sidebar.
And I know it is. This whole thing seems to be a sidebar. My
whole
life is a
podcast.
sidebar.
We should change the name to just sidebar.
Sidebar.
Lawyers with sidebar. No, look. I know this is going to come as a surprise to you all, but I have never been a pimp. But there are some people.
Shocked.
There are some
Truly
people that
shocked.
say I have pimp-like qualities.
Name one person
Nobody
who's
has ever
said
said that.
Name
Well,
one person.
I'm actually okay. Our friends.
Well, not me personally, but this guy I know.
Yeah, he's from Canada. No,
She goes to a different school.
Patty
Okay.
and I have friends, Victoria and Joe Watkins. And Victoria's a member of the bar. She does estate and VA disability claims, stuff like that, and wills and all that. And I went to law school, Victoria. And one day they presented this hat to me as a gift. And what I remember most about this hat is I think I laughed for 5 minutes straight without stopping. My abs hurt afterwards. And I've had this hat ever since. I have a collection of hats.
That's like 20 years ago now.
20 years ago. And I still have this purple felt pimp hat with the flower. I mean, with the
Feather?
feather, excuse me, yes.
We
And I
could put
love
a
it.
flower in
No,
it.
no, no.
Put a feather or put a flower on the other side.
I'm open to that.
Okay.
I was
flower?
going to say I'm good, but I'm open. Can I get
Just
like
dress it up a little
like
bit.
a
on one side.
hibiscus?
Yeah.
A white lotus?
How about we switch it out based on the season? So you get a Christmas poinsettia, you get
like
something
that.
along those
I
lines.
like
yeah,
that.
okay.
I like that.
Weird.
All right.
Okay, going back to child custody.
Yeah. Let's go.
One of the things I say is, you're two parents. You know what your children or your child needs. You're in the best position. If you're going to leave those decisions up to a third party, be it a judge or a guardian ad litem, and we'll talk about guardian ad litems at some point in this
Or if you
podcast.
happen to be listening from Texas,
A jury.
A jury, right?
Which is
if
insane
you
to
if you
me.
want to leave these decisions about your children up to third parties who don't really know you and are going to have a very short period of time to get to know you and your family, then you know what? You get what you deserve.
that's right.
Yeah, it's a game of risk, right?
It's a
think
game
about,
show. It's a
think
game
about,
show. The game
think
show
about the
child
Price is
custody.
Right. Okay, so think about the Price is Right. They got the little Plinko game where you put the thing in and it just kind of bounces
Yeah.
around. You never know really where it's going to go.
That's child
That's a
custody.
child custody case, right?
It's a child custody case.
It's a game of risk. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know what the judge is going to do.
Raise your hand if you've litigated a child custody case. You're representing a client, trying to get your client custody, and at the end of the trial, right before the judge makes a decision, you honestly have no idea what the judge is going to do. I'll raise my hand.
Oh, yeah,
I'll
for
say
sure.
it, yeah.
That's
sure.
a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also the cases, and Steve, I'm thinking of one in particular you and I had, where we get all the way through trial and we can see what the judge is going to do because we can read it on the judge's face, and we're pleading with our client, settle. In the hallway,
time.
settle.
It's time.
Yeah.
Because if you let the judge decide, it's probably going to be worse.
Yeah.
And it was worse.
And it was, I don't remember which case you're talking about, and don't
that's
say the
good.
name.
I
but-
shall not say the name.
It's the case who shall not be named.
Ever. But yeah, I mean that happens, and I've had other cases like that, where I say, hey, listen, you really do need to settle, and the client's like, no, and I get it, they're the principle of it, but the judge has a very short window to get, and every judge, because
It is a sick game show.
Yeah.
And I've actually I can think of another judge who's now retired in DeKalb who has yelled at people when they come into court before the trial and said, I think it's tantamount to child abuse that you would have a trial and let me, a complete stranger, decide what's going to happen to your child and your child's future. You know who I'm talking about, I think. Good lady. But here's the thing. If you imagine a Jeopardy format with all those little boxes up there, those boxes could be many, many things.
Right.
And if you go back to the Augusta case I was mentioning, the box could be credibility.
Yeah.
I attacked this guy on his credibility simply by saying, you said X, Y, and Z to my client in the past. And he said no.
Nuh-uh.
And then I turned to my intern, who's now our associate at Tuscan Fairfield, and I said, play the tape. And I had about 4 or 5 recorded conversations where he said one thing to my client and he said something different in court. And let me tell you something. Do not go into a courtroom and lie. Yeah. Because at the I think 4 of the 5, I impeached him. I said, you said this. And he's like, no, I didn't. Play the tape. By the time I got to the 5th one, I said, you said this.
You know what's going to happen, right?
And I'm looking at him.
You know whether. Are you really going to make me play this recording?
Right. I kind of do my head like this. I'm looking at him, and
Wait. Is that kind of like Moby Dick?
Yeah, but that's the story for another time. And I kind of looked at him. I kind of turned my head to the side. He's like, well, if you got it on tape, then I guess I said it.
Probably did.
So, but the punchline is Judge Padgett. He's up at the bench. He's at the end of the case. He's about to make a decision. And he actually says out loud, he says, you come into my courtroom and tell me you're not a perfect parent. I can deal with that because there are no perfect parents.
Right.
But then he pauses and he goes, you come into my courtroom and you lie to me? He goes,
Not great.
And so it was a close case because they were both good parents. And this is the thing. If you have 1,000 students applying for 15 slots at Harvard, the difference between those students can become very, very small things.
Oh, yeah. Tiny.
1 B in an AP class or something like that. Just so tiny is the margin there. Custody cases where both parents are good and they're both fighting for the ultimate prize, it could come down to the smallest things. And if you come into court and lie, that could be the thing.
It could just come down to the judge didn't like you that day because you were kind of a dick on the stand.
Well, you compare, you talk about child custody and game shows, you were talking about Jeopardy, and Jeopardy has, you said the boxes. I would consider those like data points, right?
Sure.
When I go to court, everybody says, oh, well, she's crazy. She's a bad parent. Okay. Generalizations don't help a judge. And I tell my client, we have to have data points that illustrate this, right? So those Jeopardy boxes, those are data points. The question is you don't really know if that data point, depending on how it's presented, can
Is
weigh.
it the daily double?
Right, it's 1,000 or 100.
Well, you
never
don't know, and you don't know which one's a daily double because it really is what resonates with the judge.
Right.
Something may stick out a lot more to the judge than you thought.
That's right, because the judge, as a trier of fact, gets to weigh the evidence, and he gives to give the appropriate weight to.
Well, and look, for example,
all these data points.
this wasn't a case that I had, but another attorney was telling me about this, that they went into court and they were arguing that their client, who had a much larger house, more room for the children, and the other parent was in a bit of a financial tight spot, and they just had a 2-bedroom apartment and a few kids having to share a space. And they harped on that and harped on that and harped on that it was a better environment in the bigger house. And the judge goes, you know what? Me and 4 other siblings grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with my parents. No, I don't think that's a problem.
Yep.
Right.
And they were like, oh.
That comes into knowing who your audience is,
Exactly.
right? Know your judge and at least have some idea of what your judge's background might be so you can at least help your client understand, hey, this might not be the best case. Like, this is probably something we don't want to harp on.
Well, yeah, and
As much as you can,
yeah,
right?
I mean, but also, a bigger house is not always better.
Correct.
Right? Having your own bedroom is not. I mean, shoot. I mean, there are 5 kids in my family, and in a 1, 2, 4-bedroom house.
But everybody's eyes were really close together.
So it
And
looks
we're
bigger.
back.
So it looks bigger,
So
right?
it looks bigger.
All right. Yeah, there was no depth perception at all. All right,
Kind of like fish.
They always bump into each other.
It's kind of a fishbowl.
I'm sorry. That's horrible. I shouldn't say that. I love your family. I love your gene
Well,
pool.
they don't love you anymore.
Okay. All
Your
right.
daughter's part of the gene
I thought you
pool.
said the gene pool was a puddle.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, look, it's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the data points that people think are going to resonate don't. A big house, lots of money doesn't resonate, in my opinion, as much as right conduct, good conduct.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I tell another example?
Yeah.
One of my best cross examinations ever. Alexa, you were there for this.
Ever?
No, without saying any
Ever?
names.
I was there.
And I know Deborah Hale was the guardian.
She was
and
the guardian.
We are big fans of Deborah Hale.
Yeah, we
Great-
already gave her a shout out. You don't get two shout
great.
outs.
Yeah, you don't get two.
Okay,
Moving
my
on,
bad.
moving on.
All right.
No,
So
no more free ads.
she's sitting in the
Sorry,
jury
Deborah.
box, and our client was seeking custody. And years ago, 8-10 years ago, he'd been convicted of a felony. He'd had a drug problem. He had stolen from her family and stuff
Yeah.
like that. But over the last 8 years, he'd rehabilitated, started not only business, but businesses, plural with a Z. He was
With a
doing
Z.
good stuff, and he was a great father. And all they had was to continue to regurgitate 8-10-year-old bad behavior and ignored the last 8 or 10
a
years.
broken record.
Yeah, and the problem is at the very end of the trial, the mother's brother gets up on the stand, basically as a negative character witness to talk trash about my client, and I get up to cross-examine him after the other attorney's done with him, and I realized very quickly I'm not going to get anywhere with him. He was dug in, and he wasn't wrong about what he was saying. It was just dated old information. So I looked at him. And I think I asked him 1 or 2 questions, and I said, no further questions. A great cross-examination when you've got nothing is not to do it. So I said, no further questions. And I turned, I'm looking at Alexa, I'm walking back to the table, and this guy just blurts out, "Your client's a piece." And I almost fell down trying to turn myself mid-stride. And I go,
We had a quick eye contact moment.
very
It was
quick.
like, what?
And I get back to the podium, and I look at him, and my simple question was, "A piece?" And then I just let it pause, let it hang there in the air. Silence, a piece. At one point, I look over at Deborah Hale, the corner of my eye, and she's like with big old deer eyes, just like watching this thing. A piece? I think I've said it twice.
Yeah.
And I just let it pause because naturally human beings want to fill the silence.
Yeah.
And this guy finally goes, "He's a piece of shit." And I said, "No further questions." And the judge gave custody to the father, to my client, and in his findings, he said that he was surprised at how negative the family was considering the amount of time that had passed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Well, and how involved our client was. Like,
Yeah.
there was so much time and so many more data points
Yeah.
to show
Right.
that was
Right.
not who that person was
So
anymore.
go back to the
No, no,
beauty,
no.
the beauty pageant analogy. I'm trying to show he's good
Yep.
over many years, and all they want to do is sling mud.
Exactly.
But I get, I get 2 things to say about that story. The first is the postscript. The postscript on that story is even
Yes.
funnier.
Be careful.
Yeah, it
Be
is.
careful about it. But do it. But just don't say no names.
I'm not saying any names.
Okay, go ahead.
That brother
Hired us.
then hired us for his own custody
Yes, the
case.
actual story is I'm walking around the office doing what I do. Somebody says, "Go see Patty in the conference room." This is a few years later. I
Yeah.
walk in. It's obvious because of the materials on the table. It's an initial consult. There's a contract on the table. And Patty says, "Hey, meet so-and-so." I was like, "Nice to meet you, sir." And didn't know him. And Patty goes, "You remember this guy from so-and-so's trial?" And I was like, "Holy cow,
God.
you're the piece of shit guy." And he goes, "Yeah." And he hired the firm. He
Yeah.
did, yeah. Anyway, what was your second point?
My second point is that case was before Judge Hutchinson.
Yeah, it
yes.
was.
Who is
Great.
retiring
And
at the
sadly-
end of 2025, sadly.
Which makes
Very
me
sad. I know.
Yes.
So-
Judge
so-
George Hutchinson III, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
Was a prosecutor in Gwinnett County for years and years. Then became a magistrate. Was eventually the chief magistrate. Then I believe he was appointed by the governor to the Superior Court,
Sounds
Yeah.
right.
and then reelected. And
He's
is
been the chief judge.
He
in Gwinnett
was
as
the
well.
chief judge
yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
And it's a real. I mean, I respect anyone's desire to retire and move on to the next chapter of life,
Yeah.
but it's a real loss.
It's just sad for us.
It's a real loss for us personally, but for Gwinnett County.
Oh, yeah.
Because Judge Hutchinson's a great guy. He really is.
Yeah. So shout out to Judge Hutchinson.
Absolutely. Good
Yeah.
dude. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about
Custody game shows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy, what's a good story you've got that custody was an issue you brought to a judge and you weren't sure how it was going to go down?
All right, so I had one not too terribly long ago that mom and dad, it was not pretty on either side. Both of them had their issues. Sure. And mom continues to make all of these allegations of dad drinks too much and dad smokes pot. But
I hear those all the time.
But while at the same time maintaining that she is just
Pristine.
just the cleanest, purest human being in the world.
She's an angel.
So she and her attorney keep making these arguments, and her attorney says, and Judge, we want him to have to go take a drug test right now. And I said, Your Honor, that's perfectly fine if the court's inclined to do that, but they both need to go do that because we have the same allegations regarding her. So the judge is like, I think that's fair. Sends them both out.
Stop.
Hey, clicky.
Oh, sorry.
Sends them
gonna
both
start throwing
out
crap
with
at you.
the sheriff's deputy to go downstairs to take a drug test. They come back, and the judge goes, okay, before I get these results, because they did drug and alcohol tests, said, I want to know what you guys think you're going to.
Wow.
I'm gonna give you-
What you think the results are.
I'm going to give you a chance to
And
confess.
So now the judge has turned it into a lie
It's
detector
a
test,
confessional,
too.
right?
I
I'm going to
love
put you in
it.
your
So-
confessional
Oh, no,
and tell me what's
this
going to
is
come back.
definitely a game
Who's the
show.
judge?
Yeah.
Duncan.
Oh, Angela Duncan, Gwinnett
Yeah,
County. I love it.
fantastic.
I love it. I love
so
it.
Judge Duncan looks at my client and goes, Sir, what's your results
What are we
going to
gonna
say?
see?
And he said, you will see alcohol, you will see marijuana. She goes, okay. Looks at the other side, says, ma'am, what's yours going to show?
I mean,
Nothing.
this really
Clean.
is a game show. They
Yeah.
really should televise
Yeah.
Oh,
this.
for sure. Yeah.
And
Oh,
she-
let him
and-
finish, let him
and-
finish.
And she goes, nothing. I'm clean.
Oh, no.
And she goes, okay.
Famous
So,
last
so
words.
about 3 minutes later, she goes, oh, the results are in. She goes,
You are not the wait, no, wrong show.
Well,
Wrong show.
yeah.
Sorry.
She goes, sir, yes, you were correct. Yours did come up positive for alcohol and marijuana. And looks at her and she goes, and yours came up higher on alcohol and higher on marijuana. And she was like, care to explain? And then mom starts going into some BS about, well, she's been sick and it was cough syrup that gave her the alcohol. And
So where'd the weed come from?
well, and then
I had a brownie and I didn't know.
To Steve's prior point, credibility was pretty much
yeah.
shot at that point.
Credibility.
on
And how did that
mother's
case end?
That case ended favorably for my client.
Well, that's good. That's
well,
a good story.
You know, Steve and I had the case where I had the client, the dad, and we're standing in front of Judge Warren Davis in Gwinnett County, who orders drug testing for my client, and he's explaining what that mom can request a drug test, and within 24 hours, my client's going to take a drug test, and mom can request one per month. So what does mom do? 2 days after the
5 minutes after the hearing,
Right.
go.
Hey,
Right.
Go.
And my client, it was like 2 days after, and my he calls me freaking out. And I'm like, dude, you were standing there in front of the judge when he was explaining the drug testing. And he's like, yeah, I know, but, and I was like,
I didn't
okay.
think it would happen this soon.
Yeah, he's like, you didn't tell me that they would, ask this soon. And I was like, really? Yeah. And it's
So-
like, what are you going to come up hot on? Cocaine.
So,
Great.
what are people to glean from this episode? I would say that they should remember the following: if you can work out custody where everybody gets some and we're not fighting, that's good.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're putting the decision in the hands of a judge. And if you're gonna go that route and have a judge decide it, it's more about how good can you make yourself look as a parent. And we haven't even gotten to the 13 or 14 bases for making this determination in the statute.
It's 17.
Which is
There's 17.
Well,
you know.
There's
We'll get there.
17 factors.
Yeah, 17. In fact, we haven't even talked about those, and we're running kind of short of time today. But there's factors that are laid out in the law, and it says the judge shall consider these factors to the extent each one applies. A good one of the 17, is how inclusive is the parent of the other
Yeah.
parent. So if you're putting up walls, not letting
You can foster a relationship
Yeah.
between the child and the other parent.
and oftentimes that's a big one.
Yeah.
But so the bottom line is, it's how good can you look, not how bad can you make the other side look. And
So maybe it's not a game show. Maybe it's just a beauty pageant.
well, I think they're both great analogies. And then the last thing is, you can't decide how much weight a judge is going to put on any one of those data points or those categories, which again goes back to, do you want a judge to decide this?
Right.
It's
Right.
It's
And then the
dangerous
other-
business.
Well, and then the other point is be honest.
Yeah.
Admit your faults, because if you've got a case where your client's done some bad stuff in the past, own it, address it in your direct.
And stop.
Don't wait for cross
Own your
examination.
shit and stop.
Own your shit and stop.
and-
But also address it in your direct examination. Don't leave it up for cross
Right.
because all you're
Right.
doing is hindering your own client's
Right.
testimony.
And look, that's something in the story that I told a minute ago. I think the fact that my client actually just fessed up and was honest about it rather than giving the judge a bunch of
Always
bogus
better.
nonsense
You know,
probably worked significantly more in his favor. Probably a better data point for him that he actually owned up to it and accepted that
Exactly.
rather than coming up with, oh, well, it was my cough syrup.
You know, the bottom
Well,
line
my
is,
neighbor smokes a lot of pot, so
bottom line is Mark,
just secondhand.
Osmosis.
Mark Twain once said, he said, you know, if you just tell the truth, then it's okay to have a lot shorter memory.
Yeah.
You don't have to think about what you said before
Yep.
and how you made an excuse for this or that. Just tell the truth, you know. Anyway, anything else we need to talk about?
I think that's it for today. I do have a shout out from my hero of the week.
Who is it?
My brow girl, Lene. She cleaned me up real nice for today's
Brow
podcast.
girl.
Yeah, because you.
My brows are looking really good.
Yesterday,
Yeah, they are.
Yesterday you had a unibrow.
You had the.
haven't
Oh,
done
I
it
was
yet.
going to say
Hey,
that.
now.
I was going to say that. You had the
Jesus.
unibrow,
I'm
right?
shouting out my girl Lene at Bear Wax. Go
Lene,
see her.
thank
She's
you for
fantastic.
fixing Alexa's unibrow.
Yes, thank you for cutting that unibrow. If you think about
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
Jimmy has a reverse unibrow.
What?
The whole beard.
Oh.
Well,
That
maybe
wasn't a good
He
one.
is a-
not a good
No.
one.
Is it
No.
unibeard?
That'd be weird if he had more than one beard.
Well, I mean, you could like shave it like right down the middle.
Yeah, no, that's
have, like,
stupid.
two.
All right.
Oh,
All right.
maybe
So.
Lene, maybe
The
Lene
reverse
could,
All right,
Hitler?
you
maybe
guys.
Lene could do that for you.
Your usefulness
I
has
got a-
peaked.
I got a
This is
barber.
Shoemaker and Lewis. They're going to keep talking, but I'm going to cut it out. Just
Lawyers
focus
Without
on me.
Billboards. Peace
Lawyers Without Billboards. Peace out.
That's it for this episode of Lawyers Without Billboards. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to follow and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more resources or to get in touch with us, visit shoemakerandlewis.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.